Welcome back. We are again joined by Seyed Marandi, a professor at Tehran University and also a former advisor to Iran's nuclear negotiation team. So thank you for coming back on the program.
Thank you for inviting me, Glenn. It's always a great honor being with you and your audience.
Well, we now see that the US is well back into its renewed war against Iran. It appears that the war will likely escalate beyond the targeting we saw in the former round. We also see the war possibly widening now as Yemen joins the fight, which means the Red Sea can be shut down. Saudi Arabia becomes much more vulnerable. Um, Iran has focused, it seems, over the past few days, a lot of its attacks on Bahrain and Kuwait. I was wondering how we can understand this, the war now. Well, what can we expect to see from Iran? How will it respond to the United States? Indeed, what is the objective of the US this time around?
Well, the Iranians, as you know, and we've discussed this before, after the signing of the MOU, they never believed that the United States would fulfill its obligations. That was never anything that anyone here counted on. So what they did was that they thought that they used the brief period of time uh, that the MOU was to remain partially credible to export a lot of oil. So Iran had accumulated a lot of oil on tankers in the Persian Gulf. They couldn't leave because of the US siege. And then as soon as the MOU was signed, tens of millions of barrels were sent to the Asian markets. And after that, the Iranians were just emptying whatever they had on shore and sending them and bringing in ships with supplies because Iran's ports were blocked for 2 months. So critical supplies that were needed were imported, and oil and other energy-related exports were exported. That was probably the most important thing that came out of the MOU for Iran. Of course, the United States was pushing for oil to leave the strait, and the energy crisis was to a degree lessened as a result. But still, the global shortage of energy is still very much present for all of us because for 4 months, literally there was a daily shortage that was accumulating, and it was not just oil and LNG, but everything. And actually, the oil shortage has been dealt with a bit in a better way than everything else because disproportionately oil tankers were leaving the Persian Gulf, but other products and other goods that are necessary for the global economy, they are lagging. They were lagging far behind. Now, of course, the strait is closed. So the Americans began to violate the deal as expected. They refused to hand over Iranian stolen assets. They refused to force the Israelis to leave Lebanon. These are all their commitments. They refused to stop threatening Iran. That's a part of the deal. They expanded sanctions, another violation. They reversed the lifting of the sanctions of Iranian oil exports, another violation of the deal. And so in general, they were doing the only thing that they left was the siege. There was no siege. They wanted to be able to take the oil, but prevent Iran from being able to benefit from the MOU. And then they, of course, opened up this corridor, which was in violation of Article 5, because they wanted to undermine Iran's authority over the strait, which was recognized in Article 5 of the MOU. So for a couple of weeks, the Iranians kept warning the Americans. They warned tankers not to use the American corridor. But the countries that assisted the United States in the war, the Saudis, the Qataris, the Emiratis, they would send their tankers through that corridor. In other words, they were trying to undermine Iran alongside the United States. So ultimately, Iran had to, after warning tankers repeatedly, they struck a number of tankers, and the Americans bombed Iran, which of course is another violation. So Article 5 was violated because the Americans opened up their own corridor in violation of the agreement, and then of course they bombed Iran, and now they've shut the strait through a siege. So every element of the MOU has been undermined by the Americans. The objective of the Americans, of course, was to, since they lost the 40-day war, the Ramadan war, they lost the siege warfare, they lost at the negotiating table. What Trump was trying to do was trying to undermine the MOU and win the war through cheating the Iranians. So they would refrain from carrying out their obligations. They would take control of the Strait of Hormuz, and in their dreams undermine Iran, whereas that was not possible beforehand. So the Iranians, they resisted again. They would not. They said that they're not going to allow the Americans to control the strait. And the battle that we're seeing now, the war that we're seeing these days, is the war over the Strait of Hormuz. The Americans are planning an invasion. I'm not saying it will necessarily happen. I'm not saying it will necessarily happen in the next few days. But they have plans for an invasion. Whether they carry them out or not, we'll see. But the Iranians, as you pointed out, the focus of Iranian strikes are on Bahrain and Kuwait, and that's because that's where most of the American assets have been placed for a ground invasion. But of course, Iran is also striking U.S. targets in Jordan, in Qatar, anywhere in Iraq, anywhere where they feel that it's necessary to strike, they'll strike. This time around, of course, Iran struck American assets in Oman too, because Oman was being used against Iran. But that's where we are right now. The Americans are, of course, having much more difficulty in destroying Iranian targets because, as you know, Iranian targets are deep underground. Key assets. When Iran wants to fire missiles or drones, they don't put them in inside buildings or in piles somewhere. They take out whatever they need, they fire them, and then they go back to their bases. Or they take out different missiles and drones, spread them out on in different areas, put them apart from one another so that the Americans cannot bomb them in large numbers. Everything has been spread out in Iran and placed underground. So the Americans, when they strike, they're not able to do much. On the other hand, U.S. assets are all on the land. They're not underground. And it's almost impossible to build underground bases anyway. Even if they do decide to build underground bases, it'll take years. But in some of these countries, it's just not possible. Iran, the reason why Iran has been able to effectively build so many of these underground bases without the Americans being able to destroy them is because Iran is very mountainous. And in mountainous areas, these underground bases become much stronger. But in flat land and islands, the ground is not as such where you can protect your assets underground easily. So countries like Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, the shores of Saudi Arabia, and most of the Emirates, it's just not doable. But in any case, if they want to, it'll take years. So it's easy for the Iranians to destroy U.S. assets. What they have to do is destroy the radar systems, the electronic warfare systems, and then they just take out the buildings, the hangars, and whatever it is that they're targeting. So Iran has that advantage. And of course, Iran has been accumulating missiles and drones for decades now. And I think last night they introduced a new missile to the war. So And remember, the Americans were saying, Trump in particular was saying that they've wiped out all of Iran's missiles and drones. The Iranian strikes on U.S. targets during the last few days have been very heavy, and they're just firing missiles and drones across the region at U.S. targets. So we are where we are, and it's unclear where things are heading. The Iranians are determined to make sure that the Strait restrictions to the Strait are not removed until the United States implements its obligations in the MOU. Well, whether you call it the MOU or not, it doesn't matter. Iran demands that the United States force the Israelis to leave Lebanon, to end the genocidal attacks, to hand over stolen assets, and so on. Otherwise, I'm quite certain that trade through the Strait of Hormuz will not normalize, even if the Americans halt the hostilities, the military hostilities.